Right, good morning everybody. It's a Wednesday Bike Club again. So what are we talking about today? Well, it's a bit of a follow-on and a slightly sad tale again of people trying to, or people in power, shall we say, trying to force their will on others again. But in a slightly different way. So if you remember the issue around the Whiteways Cafe and how that changed the landscape of biking, particularly in this area, sort of between Surrey and Sussex. So we now have if you like, an attack on the biker cafe at Rikers, which is the bottom of Box Hill, which I believe is the oldest biking cafe in the UK. It's been there for nearly 100 years, so there or thereabouts. And but the way they're going about it now is quite interesting, and it's one of those sort of thin end of the wedge type attacks, But I thought we'd discuss it anyway and have a chat about it and how I think it's actually quite important. It's always important, but it's this where it could affect other places in the UK. So come on, let's go and have a chat about it and try and cheer ourselves up. Come on. Right, so we've arrived at Rikers, and it's midweek morning and it's busy. There's a lot of people here, and the reason it's busy is because it's been here for nearly 100 years as a biker cafe. So what's the issue at the moment, and why am I linking it with the Whiteways debacle? Well, the problem you've got at the moment is that you've got now that Whiteways has gone, it's probably fair to assume that Rikers has got incredibly busy, even though it was always busy. People bikers are now coming here more and more, and they're probably using it more of a sort of roundabout way to go. They'll come here, do a circuit, and then come back again, that sort of thing. But because you haven't got that other sort of destination, reasonable mileage destination of Whiteways, this is getting busier and busier, which is great because, in terms of what it is, it's a biker cafe, and that's what it's for at the end of the day. It's been here a long time. The people that have taken over Rikers in the last few years have spent a lot of money putting, marquees up and big screens and all the rest of it, and doing out the actual cafe itself and that lovely BSA they got in there. So what's actually happening then? Well, the issue that's occurring is that I think with the amount of bikers here, there's a certain amount of what we might call antisocial behaviour, and that's always followed biker cafes, hasn't it? Certainly ones this size, that you will get a few people that are going to rev bikes and pull wheelies in car parks. I've seen it myself. So I'm not going to debate the issues around that. But what's happened is that you've now got the public space protection orders, the PSPOs. It's been so hard to remember that, which came into force in about 2014. It was an amalgamation of lots of different sort of antisocial behaviour orders, which were sort of all lumped into one in the end. And it allows local authorities to try to control, remove, stop, and all the rest of it, public order offences as such, or public nuisance, antisocial behaviour. The problem that you've got here is, let's backtrack a little bit. For something that's been here for nearly 100 years, where you have what you have essentially is a public car park with the cafe, which I believe is from private ground, and by the cafe, there's this sort of slight rub up, isn't there? That I think if they owned the car park, I don't think there'd be a major issue. But we have a situation where we now have residents, so-called residents, and I'll go back into that in a little while, who are now, complaining about the antisocial behaviour after 100 years. Although it's gone on for years, over a period of time, there's been lots of complaints made about the bike noise, not about the cafe, but about the bike noise and stuff, and people coming into the car parks. So, whereas Whiteways, they went down the route of trying to eventually sort of close the cafe, really, through various means of just not renewing contracts and stuff. This, they've got to do it in a different way, because what you remember is that Rikers, where it's been taken over, they've obviously had to work with the council as such to get permission to, build new things, and what they've done here, which they've done a really great job, that's made it more attractive. You've got more bikes here, and because of Whiteways, you've got even more bikes here. So the other issue you have is that the residents here have a good ally, don't they, within it, because you have a councillor that lives in Mickleham, and when the problem you have in those situations is when people are in positions of power and they know how the system works, they know how to work it, and you tend to find that the groups which are under threat are very underrepresented in that, which again is something I'll come on to. So the local authority, there's a set procedure you have to go through, and lots of things you have to comply with before you can get a public restrictive order on here, public space protection order on. So you've got to petition in the first instance, so you've got to get enough people to complain and what they're complaining about, and they have to be very specific. You can't just say, I don't like motorbikes. They've got to be very specific in what they want, what's causing them harm and aggravation, and you have to prove that point, basically. So petitions have been in circulation, getting people to sign petitions, etc. Now I think where this has become a bit iffy is because one of those petitions, I think, that had 1,100 signatures on it, is actually more than the number of residents in the Mickleham area. So you got to think, well, there's something not quite right about that. And there's also been talk of, and all this stuff is unsubstantiated, I'm just taking this from social media, which is, again, is a problem, isn't it? Is that, people are being petitioned in places like Cranley, which is about 7 or 8 miles away from here. And I think that does their cause no good whatsoever in that respect, because you can appeal these orders, but unfortunately you've got to do it through the High Court. But we'll come back to that. So they're going down the public space protection order to restrict or to control, if you like. They can't stop motorbikes coming in here. It's just an impossibility. But they can have some sort of control over the noise levels and stuff like that. Now, there's been also a petition brought about saying that they wanted to get some acoustic cameras and stuff like that in there. If anybody's not heard of an acoustic camera, it's just basically, it's a bit like a speed camera, but it measures noise levels. And if your bike is, overly loud, then you could get a fine for it and stuff like that. I would presume that comes into things like, like MOT standard. If it's above MOT standard, then you could get clobbered for it. But I think the thing is here, where I think it's very difficult for residents to get this order in place is because this has been here for nearly 100 years, and and this so often happens, people move into an area and they realize, there's little motorbikes that don't like this, I'm going to try and fight to get some restriction on it. And there is a lot to be said for, don't move to an area where you have something with a loud noise. Don't move to an airport, if you don't like airplanes. And I suppose there's a little bit of that in this, and I've seen this again and again. There used to be a clay pigeon shooting club near Billingshurst, we'd have been there for years and years and years. Somebody moved into the area, didn't like the sound, and they got shut down. So these things do happen, unfortunately. But where I think I think there's a great risk is that if the groups which are using this space as a meet-up and everything for motorbikes aren't represented properly, or they don't represent themselves, I think it's much easier for councils or local authorities to get these orders put in place. And I think it's a great risk. And where the risk there is that it becomes a test case, because councils will go to other councils that have gone through the same process, and they will use the case history of those to try and get one put through. And I think that's very dangerous, that if these things go ahead without any representation or pushback from the groups that use these sites. So I think that's the worry for me. I think it's the thin end of the wedge. I think you have this situation where, you know, if it does go through, that it could set a precedent. Looking on from that though, if an order does go through, who's going to actually enforce it? Now, you're not going to get the police doing it. The police have much better things to spend their time on than looking after this and, you know, checking if people are, you know, revving their motorbikes and all the rest of it. So it'd probably be left to the local authority. So they've got to get local authority people to come down and, you know, maybe with microphones and clipboards and be watching to see if there's any infringements of the order, and the order will have certain specifics to it in what you can and cannot do. So you think, well, you know, who's going to want to do that? Who's going to want to sit in here? Which poor soul has got to stand in front of 500, 600, 700 motorcyclists and issue out a fine, on the spot fine, for someone revving their motorbike or, you know, whatever? And you think, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I'm not saying that these people will be intimidated by the motorcyclists. They will just be intimidated by the situation. Of course, what you then end up with is that possible confrontational side of things, which gets out of hand very quickly, doesn't it? There'll be people that don't see the poor soul that's just doing a job, and you get confrontation, and that's when problems start, and that's when you really get the law come down on you. And I think that's the risk here, is that. And I think, you know, Rikers are doing their bit. They're putting signage up, which these things have to go. The process has to be done. You know, it's a bit like reason with your residents, isn't it? And sort of say, look, you know, we're in this situation. Please respect neighbours. Do not rev your bikes. Do not pull wheelies. This sort of thing. And I think that's really important. And I think we, as motorcyclists, when you see that happening, I think we have to call that out. I'm not saying you should get overly involved, but you know, we always say if you see something terrible happening, don't get too involved, because you're probably going to get stabbed. You know, but I think there is a thing where a certain amount of people do need to understand that there are people that live here. Riding through villages and revving your motorbikes is not a great thing to do. You know, but that's your choice at the end of the day. I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but I don't think it's a very good choice in life. And when it's people that, like they did at Whiteways, that use this as almost like a confessional, where they turn up because they just want to be around other bikers and talk and have a chat, where that's their whole social structure is based around that, where they have nothing else to, you know, to sort of fulfill that gap in their life. And if people come down and cause havoc, not saying they do, but if they do and the order goes through eventually and more stringent things happen, then those people have really lost out. You know, the people that are causing the problems just ride off and go somewhere else. And I think it's worth thinking about that. But my concern is setting the precedent. If you do get those orders in place, that I think it would cause way more problems than it's going to solve. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think it's you know, what's your view on this? I think again we have that situation where you have, it's much easier for people to mobilise people when they think they're being wronged, or that, you know, people think, oh yeah, I don't want the noise and all the rest of it. But there's no motorbikes here now, but the sound of the road, you've got the M25 just above the hill there, and the roads here are generating far more noise than the motorbikes in here, without any shadow of a doubt. The ambient decibels here is pretty high. I would say it's probably about 70 or 80. So you've got to think that, you know, there's no real thought process that goes into these things. It's just I don't want it in my backyard. And but I think the strong point for here is that this has been around far longer than most of the residents here at the end of the day. And it's more a case of just education, isn't it? Education, and just showing some consideration for the cafe, who spent a lot of money in this place, and also for the residents that do live here, because there are a few, not many though, interestingly. But there you are. You'd have to see what happens in that respect. But there you are. That's my thoughts on it. You know, the whys and wherefores of people coming to cafes like this is, you know, for their own views, isn't it? But I just think we have to be very careful that the precedent isn't set with this, because I think it could be a little bit of a virus that goes around the country when people see that they can get orders like this. But the enforcement of it is very, very difficult, and I wouldn't wish anybody to have to come here and do that. And if people have to come and do that, what you don't want is the local authorities using outside companies doing that, where the people that are coming to enforce the order may not be quite as polite about it. Let's just say that. Right, give us your thoughts on it. What do you think? Take care, ride safe, don't pull any wheelies, and I'll see you next time. Look after yourselves.